Hello again, third graders, and welcome back to our unit on fairy tales. Today we're going to be doing part 15, where we compare and contrast the setting of two fairy tales. So last time we were together, we compared and contrasted our main characters from the traditional fairy tale of Cinderella and the adapted version of that same tale called Abba And you learned how to use a new graphic organizer, a web graphic organizer, to think deeply about the character. And then you grew an idea. And we teachers are super, super excited about these ideas that you guys are growing. It means that you are becoming better readers and that you're understanding a lot more of what you're reading, which is fantastic. Keep sharing that with us. Today we're going to be working on comparing and contrasting the settings in our traditional fairy tale and our adapted fairy tale. And we have two questions that are going to guide our work. Of course, we're going to be thinking about how are your settings alike and different? And then what is one big idea that we're growing from the differences in the adapted tale? So I want to remind you that we're looking at traditional fairy tales and adaptations. Most traditional fairy tales come from Europe, which is that large circle in the middle of your map. And the adaptation that we're focusing on today comes from the Philippines, which are the islands in the Pacific Ocean on the right side of your map. So just to give you a little bit of perspective. Yesterday, we worked with a character web, thinking about all the different things that kind of go into the characters that we study, right? What they wear, what they eat, who are their friends, who are their enemies. And today we're going to be doing that same type of work, but we're going to be doing it with a setting web. So when we do a setting web, we want to consider three things. We want to consider place. So we want to think about what kind of place it is. Is it a big city? Is it a farm, a small town, a village, a kingdom? How would we describe the overall place? And then the next thing is environment. This could mean a lot of different things, but when we talk about it in a setting web, what we're talking about is that we are thinking about what's the weather like? Is it grassy? Is it desert? Is it jungle? Is it mountains? What kinds of things do we see in nature in the place that we are? And then the last thing we want to consider is time. When did this happen? Did it happen a long time ago? Did it happen right now? Was it in the morning, afternoon, evening? So all of those things are important to consider when we are thinking about a setting web, when we begin our comparing and contrasting work. So of course I started with Cinderella, and I really thought about some of the places Cinderella was in her story. And what I came up with in that top bubble was that this takes place in a kingdom, and it's near her home because she doesn't have very far to travel from her home to the actual ball that she attends. And then I thought about the environment. She's mostly inside of buildings, inside her home cleaning or at the palace attending the ball. But when we look at some of the pictures on the outside of her home, there's a lot of trees outside. So I think it must have a lot of trees. And then the time that it took place, I think it mostly happened at night. Most of the pictures show that it's nighttime. I know that the ball happened at night because she was waiting for the clock to hit midnight. And I also think this happened a long time ago, and I starred that on my setting web because I was thinking about how it says once upon a time. And often when I hear those terms or those words, once upon a time, I think, oh, this must have happened a long time ago. So I did the same thing for Abba I was thinking about where she was, the place, the environment, and the time. And the place is called out really early on in the book. It's the Philippines, which is an island. It's actually a group of islands, but for this story, she was just on one. And I also noticed in some of the pictures and some of the words, there are boats being described. It says that her father was a fisherman. And then I see some palm trees. So that tells me it must really be kind of like an island. And I'm using that schema, my background knowledge, to really think about what an island is like. The environment, I think, must mostly be jungle, and the story takes place mostly outside. While we talk about Abadahena's home, I didn't really notice a big structure, like a big house that she might have been living in. I do notice that she spent a lot of time outside, her mother's grave down by the river. And like I said, that led me to think that this must have taken place kind of in a jungle environment. And then when I think about time, it doesn't happen at night or morning or afternoon. I had no clues in the text to help me understand that, but it does say at the beginning of the story, long ago, which again made me think about that idea of once upon a time, which tells me that it happened a long time ago. So After I filled out my setting webs for both Cinderella and Abba Henna, I did exactly what we've been working on. I highlighted the parts that were the same. And when I looked at it, the only thing that was the same was that it happened long ago. So that's what I put in the middle of my Venn diagram. Of course, on the sides, it's all the things that happened to Cinderella, and then the other side is all the things that happened to Abba Henna. And I'm going to continue to look at my Abba Henna story, and I thought about the jungle piece. About how it happens in a jungle and how it happens mostly outside, which is very different than Cinderella. Cinderella happened mostly inside of the house, inside the palace, but Abba Henna was really different because it happened in kind of an outside jungly place. So I wanted to explore that and think deeply about that. And here's what I wrote. Again, third graders, you'll notice that I put my date up at the top right so that I could remember and keep track of my thinking. And so, like I said, this is kind of how I grew my big idea. I wrote, one of the big differences in the setting of Abba Henna is that it takes place mostly outside. I know that this tale takes place outside in the Philippines, which is an island. And from what I know about islands, they're usually warm and it's really pleasant to be outside. So I'm thinking the setting happens to be outside because islands usually have nice weather. The setting is also jungle-like, which I think is important because that is where Abba Henna meets the spirit of the forest, who ends up helping her out of her bad situation. So the big idea that I grew was that the author chose to make the setting different in the Philippines because it's around a lot of the things that help Abba Henna in her bad situation, like meeting the spirit of the forest. So third graders, here's your assignment for today. Of course, you're going to set a goal while you're comparing and contrasting your two fairy tales, the traditional and the adapted version. And it could sound like this. I will use a I will use a web graphic organizer to compare and contrast my two settings. I will use a Venn diagram to compare and contrast my two settings. And then, of course, you're going to want to take notes on your thinking, citing along the way. So once again, you can either print or draw the graphic organizers and the Venn diagram, and then use the notes that you've already written about your traditional fairy tale and your adapted fairy tale to fill in that information. And the big important part is I want you to think about one thing that's different in the adaptation and the idea that you have because of it. So here's some sentence starters that could help you. In the traditional fairy tale, this happens, but in the adaptation, this happens or doesn't. I think that is because, I believe that that is because this connects to, from what I know about this, I think this. Kind of like when you think about what I said about what I knew about an island, I was using my schema to help me really think about why the setting was at an island. So the last step is for you to take a picture or video of yourself, kind of growing that big idea, and send it to your teacher through Seesaw or Class Dojo. Good luck, third graders, and we'll see you next time.